Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Okay, so today's stack of intelligence reports and analysis is really something. We're zeroing in on China's tech landscape from March 2025. And wow, there's a lot to unpack here. What really jumps out is how interconnected everything is. We've got, automation, AI, government policies, this big push for environmental sustainability, even some geopolitical moves all kind of tangled up together.
Yeah, it's really striking, isn't it? Just looking at these reports, you get a sense of this really intense period of transformation in China's tech sector. And I think what's fascinating is how these forces you mentioned are all feeding into each other. You can't really separate them. It gives us a really valuable glimpse into China's strategic priorities at this moment in time.
Right. It's like all these different pieces are part of this larger puzzle we're trying to put together.
Exactly.
So I think a good place to start might be with automation. This whole concept of dark factories that kept popping up in the material really caught my eye.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the most visually compelling aspects of this, right? Imagine a factory humming with activity, producing goods, but completely dark inside. No human workers. Just rows of robots and AI systems working away.
Like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's real. I mean, we're talking about fully automated production powered by, AI and robotics. These factories can operate without lights and without a single human worker on site.
It's straight out of Made in China 2025, this initiative that was all about leveraging technology to upgrade industry and boost efficiency. And the thing is, it wasn't just theoretical. We're seeing real-world examples like, changing precision technology. They implemented this kind of automation and reportedly saw their productivity jump by like 250% while simultaneously reducing their workforce by a staggering 90%. I mean, talk about eye-opening stats. That's not just tinkering around the edges. It's a complete transformation of manufacturing as we know it.
Yeah, 250% productivity increase, that's huge, and a 90% workforce reduction. That's a massive shift. And it begs the question, what happens to all those workers? If you're seeing these kinds of efficiency gains, what are the societal consequences?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something that your sources really highlight, the socioeconomic dimension of all this. There were these serious concerns about widespread job displacement, particularly for people in those lower-skilled manufacturing jobs. Oxford Economics even put out a projection, I think it was something like 12 million jobs potentially lost in China by 2030 due to automation.
12 million. That's a sobering figure. I mean, historically, we've seen how major economic shifts could trigger all sorts of social unrest. Managing this kind of transition is going to be critical, I think, for maintaining stability.
Absolutely. There was definitely a growing awareness of this challenge in the reports we've been looking at. And it was directly tied to another concern that kept coming up, rising economic inequality. If automation is creating a world where the benefits are concentrated among a smaller and smaller group while others are left behind, that's a recipe for serious problems down the road. It's like we're standing at this crucial crossroads.
Yeah, it feels like we're in this race between technological innovation and our ability to adapt to the consequences. So how do we address this potential for massive job displacement? Do the sources offer any solutions?
Well, there was definitely a lot of talk about the need for reskilling programs, extensive ones. The idea is, you have to equip people with the skills to handle the new types of jobs that will emerge in this automated world.
Right, makes sense.
Instead of, assembling products on an assembly line, workers might be managing those automated systems or maintaining those complex robots or developing the software that makes all this possible. It's not just about jobs vanishing. It's about a fundamental reshaping of the skills landscape.
So it's almost like a whole new industrial revolution, just driven by different forces.
In a way, yeah. And it requires a whole new way of thinking about work and education and training.
Okay, so we've got this wave of automation reshaping industries. Now let's talk about AI, because while we were putting all this together around late March 2025, Deepseek, they came out with version 3.1 of their AI model. And it sounds like this wasn't just a minor update.
No, not at all. This was a major leap forward. One of the big things was the enhanced reasoning capabilities and the multilingual abilities they built into this new version. Imagine an AI that's not just processing information, but actually reasoning about it, solving complex problems. And not just in one language, but across many different languages. Think about the implications for things like research or global commerce. It's a whole new level of understanding.
Yeah, that cross-language understanding that's particularly interesting in a world that's, increasingly interconnected. But there was also this mention of an advanced architecture based on something called a mixture of experts, or MOE. I've got to admit, that sounds a bit over my head.
It is a bit technical, but think of it like this. Imagine you have one really smart person, right? That's like a traditional AI. Now imagine instead you have a team of specialists, each an expert in their own field. That's the idea behind MOE. The AI model can actually call on different experts within its network depending on the specific task at hand. It's much more efficient and powerful than just trying to make a single AI model bigger and bigger. It's almost like, a Swiss Army knife of AI, different tools for different jobs.
That's a great way to put it, a Swiss Army knife AI.
Yeah.
So more efficient and more powerful.
And importantly, more cost-effective. You're not just throwing more computing power at every problem. You're being more targeted and strategic.
That makes sense. And wasn't there also something about this Deepseek model having improved coding capabilities?
Absolutely. It could generate code across multiple programming languages. Think about what that means for software development and all sorts of other industries.
So you have automation changing the face of manufacturing, and then you have these simultaneous leaps forward in AI. Feels like those two trends are feeding into each other, really accelerating the pace of change. And it's no surprise that this is all happening within the context of government policy. What were the main takeaways from that big two sessions meeting in March 2025 that seemed to really lay out the government's roadmap?
Yeah, the two sessions meeting, it's always a key event for understanding China's direction. And in 2025, the priorities laid out by Premier Li Qiang really reflected this emphasis on tech-driven progress. Modernizing industries was right at the top of the list, which, is no surprise given what we were just talking about with those dark factories and the advancements in AI. It was clear that the government saw technology as central to their economic strategy.
They also talked about boosting consumption, which to me seems like a potential challenge given the whole job displacement thing we discussed earlier. How do you encourage people to spend if they're worried about their jobs or having to retrain for entirely new careers?
It's a tough balancing act for sure. On one hand, you have to drive innovation for long-term growth. On the other hand, you have to address the immediate needs of people who might be negatively impacted by those very same innovations. It's almost like a tightrope walk for policymakers. It seems like the government was aware of the potential for economic headwinds. Maybe they were thinking about things like strengthening social safety nets or finding ways to create new sectors that could absorb workers who had been displaced by automation.
So a lot of moving parts there, a lot of complexities to manage. What were some of the other key priorities they mentioned?
Well, attracting foreign investment was a big one, which makes sense if you're trying to build a world-leading tech sector. Bringing in outside capital and expertise can really accelerate that process.
Yeah. Partnerships and collaborations like that could be a big driver of innovation.
Exactly. And then there was the focus on promoting green development, which was really interesting given some of the other things happening around the same time. And that leads us into this whole other aspect of what was happening in March 2025, the expansion of China's environmental technology policy.
Right, the expansion of the emissions trading system, or ETS. This was a big deal. They expanded it to include a whole bunch of major industrial emitters like steel, cement, and aluminum. That brought the coverage of this system up to over 60% of the nation's total CO2 emissions.
Mm-hmm.
So for anyone who's not familiar with this kind of system, can you break it down? How does an ETS actually encourage greener industrial practices?
So the basic idea is to create a market for carbon emissions. Companies are either given or have to buy these permits, called allowances, for the amount of carbon they're allowed to emit. If they go over their limit, they have to buy more allowances from companies that have emitted less. So it creates this financial incentive for these big industries to invest in cleaner technologies and become more energy efficient and adopt more sustainable practices. It's a market-based way to align environmental goals with industrial development.
So it's not just about top-down regulations. It's about using market forces to encourage innovation and reduce their environmental impact. That's pretty clever. Okay, now we need to talk about one last piece of this puzzle. The role technology was playing in China's geopolitical and security activities in March of 2025. And there were some pretty eye-catching events happening around that time.
Oh, definitely. There was that incident on March 6th where a record number of high-altitude balloons were sent into Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, or an ADIZ for anyone who doesn't know. It's basically an area of airspace around a country where they monitor and identify incoming aircraft. While the exact purpose of those balloons was never officially confirmed, it seems pretty likely that they were engaged in some kind of intelligence gathering operation. It just really highlights how technology, particularly surveillance technology, is being deployed in these geopolitically sensitive areas.
Yeah, you're right. That incident really underscores the increasingly blurry lines between technology and international relations. And there was also that whole business with the PLA Navy conducting those exercises near Australia right around that same time.
Those exercises were a pretty clear demonstration of the growing sophistication and reach of China's military capabilities, and a lot of those capabilities rely heavily on advanced technologies. It was almost like a show of force, a way to signal their growing naval power.
And then there's the case of that former engineer who was sentenced to death for espionage on March 19th. It sounds like something ripped from the headlines of a spy thriller, but it really highlights how high the stakes are when it comes to technological secrets and national security.
Absolutely. It shows just how sensitive these advanced technologies are and the lengths that governments are willing to go to protect their own technological advantages and maybe even acquire the technologies of their rivals. In this era of rapid technological progress, the security implications are huge, both domestically and internationally.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear how interconnected all these different pieces were back in March 2025. You've got automation driven by AI, a government actively pushing for technological advancement, and this same technology being used to achieve environmental goals and to bolster their geopolitical position. It's a pretty fascinating and complex picture.
And at the heart of it all is this tension between the potential for efficiency and progress that these technologies offer and the very real social and economic challenges they create, like the possibility of massive job displacement. Finding a way to navigate that tension, I think that's going to be one of the defining challenges, not just for China, but for the whole world in the years to come.
It definitely raises a lot of questions and leaves us with a lot to think about. So, given everything we've discussed, the rapid advancements in AI, the government's strategic priorities, the push for sustainability, the geopolitical implications, what does all this mean for the future of work? What does it mean for international competition in technology? These are questions that go way beyond just March of 2025, and I have a feeling we'll be revisiting them many times in future deep dives. But for now, thanks for joining us on this journey as we explore this critical moment in China's technological evolution. It's been quite a ride.
It has. Thanks for having me.